Hello friends, in the previous video we've covered the first golden rule of chess, controlling the center squares. Today I'll teach you the second golden rule of chess, called development of the pieces. In chess, development means moving your pieces out from the back ranks to the next ranks into the playing field. Remember, in chess, you need all your pieces in play to have the best chance of winning the game. Suppose you're playing with a white chessman. Let's talk about how you can develop your pawn, knight, bishop, rook, and the queen in the beginning to bring them into a good playable position. First, let's talk about the pawn's development. If you move your e2 pawn, which is also called the king's pawn, to e4 like this, now you can see you've unlocked your queen on d1 and white bishop on f1. And if you move your pawn on d2, which is also called queen's pawn, to d4 like this move gave your bishop on c1 room to move in the diagonal direction. Knight's development. Knights are low stepping pieces that work best away from the back ranks or side files, but once developed in the center, they can be very powerful. Knights are strongest in the center at the early stages, so try to develop knights as early as possible. The knight on g1 covers only 3 squares, e2, f3, and h3. But if you developed your knight on g1 and moved to f3 like this, then you can easily control d4, e5, g5, h4, h2, g1, e1, and d2 squares from here. Bishop development. The developed bishops are very useful because bishops can move to any number of vacant squares in any diagonal direction. The bishop on f1 is blocked by the e2 and g2 pawn. If you move the e2 pawn 1 or 2 squares to e3 or e4 like this, see that the bishop on f1 is unlocked and can be moved to a number of vacant squares diagonally. Now this bishop can be developed on c4 position, controlling the major diagonal squares. Now if we move the g2 pawn 1 or 2 squares to g3 or g4 like this, then the bishop on f1 can be developed on the g2 position, controlling these diagonal squares. Similarly, the bishop on c1 can be developed. Rook's development. The simplest way to develop your rook is by castling. Castling not only protects the king, but also helps to bring the rooks into play into combination with others. For instance, the white player castles on the king's side. The combination of both rooks is very useful. The rooks are developed as you can freely move your rooks f1 to e1 and a1 to d1, controlling these 2 central files and protecting this rank 1 so the rooks can be well developed by castling. Now let's talk about the queen's development. The queen is a major piece because it can always control a minimum 21 squares, so the development and using this piece wisely is very important. The queen should not be brought out in the start of the game, that it would be trapped by an opponent's minor pieces and you'll lag in development of your pieces. For instance, white player moves its e2 pawn to e4 and then black moves e7 pawn to e5, and when the white wants to develop his queen, like the queen d1 to g4, now the black can threaten the queen by moving g8 knight to f6, attacking the g4 queen as well as the e4 pawn. Now the white has to move the queen like queen moves from g4 to h3, and black moves d6 pawn, protecting the e5 pawn and attacking the h3 queen by its ch bishop. So white will have to move the queen. Black can easily lead in development. Example of development. In this situation, the white pieces are well developed. Like the e4 and d4 pawns are controlling the center square c5, d5, e5, and f5. And the knight on f3 is protecting d4 and h2 pawn, and also controlling the major squares. d4, e5, g5, h4, h2, g1, e1, and d2. And the knight on c3 is protecting the e4 and a2 pawn and controlling these squares. d5, e4, e2, d1, b1, a2, a4, and b5. and the bishop on f4 is controlling these diagonal squares, and the white bishop on c4 controls these diagonal squares. Now, the other pieces, like queen, the rooks, can easily be developed. Rooks can be developed by castling king e1 to g1 and rook h1 to f1. And the white queen on d1 can be developed to any square, like e2 controlling the squares diagonally, vertically, and horizontally, and then the rook f1 to e1 controlling the e file. Let me give you a few important tips for development. 1. Give priority to your least active pieces. 2. Exchange your less useful pieces for your opponent's useful pieces. 3. Restrict the development of your opponent's pieces. 4. Neutralize your opponent's best piece. 5. Secure strong squares for your piece. This is all for today's lesson. I hope you've understood why development of pieces is important for your game. In the next video, we'll talk about the third golden principle of chess, called King's Safety. If you like the video, hit the like button, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel.